Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NBG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming, and I'm really excited about this show. And because listeners, I want you to follow this instruction. I need you to open your political mind for this discussion because I've got 3 guests who have been really dedicated to the work they are doing. And they, part of their work is challenging the norms that are out there and want us to do better in our political world. So I think that's really what I'm going to call this episode, Open Your Political Mind, because that's what they do for a living. And even if it's unintentional, just the work that they do. A couple of them I could definitely say is intentional. And one, just because of her dedication and her commitment and her experience, the conversation that we had, I should say, should open your mind about the issue that she works on. So that's my challenge for y'all today. I want y'all to open your political mind and really look at how we can do better in this country, to get beyond this reality show garbage that we're dealing with right now, right? Also, too, some of you all will, by the time you hear this, will be recovering from Halloween and all that stuff. And that's all good. And we're fast track approaching now the end of the year. It's getting close to the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and all that stuff. And I know some of y'all are like, boy, 2025, it's been a long year. It seems like it. But, we're chugging along as normal. So, and I hope that you enjoyed that extra hour of sleep. And I don't know how much longer we're going to have that. But Grace is going to touch on those things as she normally does. And the one other story that's kind of hitting that she'll touch on is Hurricane Melissa that hit the Caribbean pretty hard. Jamaica was the most devastated. The most severe impact was Jamaica. It affected the island of Hispaniola, where Haiti and the Dominican Republic exist, and Cuba, and even the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos were impacted. But the storm really did its worst in Jamaica. And so the foresight of the Jamaican government preparing for the storm because the storm took a very unusual path. It looked like it was heading straight to the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, I say Gulf of Mexico, by the way. Y'all can follow the lead and call it whatever you want to. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm going to call it the Gulf of Mexico. It was headed toward the Gulf, and then it decided to make a right turn and go directly toward the island of Jamaica. And so in its full force. So, they haven't seen a storm of that magnitude since Gilbert. And that was in the 80s, I believe. So go to this website, supportjamaica.gov.jm. And if you want to contribute to help in their rebuilding efforts, please do that. Like I said, they had the foresight to create this website when they saw the right turn happen. Because, it just looked like it was just going to be a lot of rain, but they got the full storm. I mean, Category 5, the whole 9 yards. So, and it primarily went across the western part of the island, but the storm was so big that it impacted the whole island. I mean, the storm was bigger than the island physically itself. The eye of the storm was about at least half the size of the island. So yeah, supportjamaica.gov.jm. Please do that. If you want to contribute to other locales that were impacted, you can always go to International Red Cross, their website, and connect with them as well. And, there are some people, United States and United Kingdom and some other countries have already earmarked resources and people to go down there and to, try to help with the recovery. But whatever you can do to help, those folks will greatly appreciate it. Because, Jamaica was the most hardest hit. There were fatalities on other islands as far as we know. We still haven't gotten accurate count because they're really just in a position to start assessing damage because it was a slow moving storm. So it literally took like a day to get across. So do what you can to help those people out. All right. So also, I make my normal appeal to subscribe to the podcast. You can go to patreon.com/amomenterik.Fleming. Yeah. Or go to momenterik.com and continue to show love to the podcast. And yeah, so enough of the housekeeping stuff. Let's go ahead and get this started. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Erik. Hurricane Melissa made history as the strongest storm ever to directly hit Jamaica, causing widespread devastation and power outages before weakening slightly and making its second landfall in eastern Cuba, resulting in multiple deaths across the region. A former sheriff's deputy was convicted by an Illinois jury of second-degree murder for the 2024 fatal shooting of Sonia Massey. The U.S. Department of Agriculture will not use its contingency funds to pay for November's SNAP benefits, which are lapsing due to the federal government shutdown. Becoming the latest focal points in a widening mid-decade redistricting conflict, Virginia Democrats convened a special session to counter Republican gains, and Indiana's Republican governor is calling for a special session to weigh redrawing their map. The U.S. Border Patrol abruptly called off a planned immigration enforcement push in the San Francisco Bay Area. Civil rights groups have filed a lawsuit seeking to block the U.S. Justice Department's decision to close the Community Relations Service, which focused on reducing racial and ethnic tensions. New York Attorney General Letitia James pleaded not guilty to federal charges of allegedly lying on mortgage documents. California Governor Gavin Newsom stated that he is considering a run for U.S. president in 2028 and will decide after the 2026 midterm elections. Israel launched airstrikes in Gaza, killing at least 104 people after accusing Hamas of violating a fragile ceasefire brokered by President Trump. Argentine President Javier Milei's party won a strong victory in midterm legislative elections, which strengthens his mandate to continue radical economic reforms. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 1/4 percentage point. And the U.S. Senate failed to reach a consensus on a bill that would make daylight saving time permanent. I am Grace G., and this has been a Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it's time for my guest, Les Leopold. After graduating from Oberlin College and Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs, Les Leopold co-founded and currently directs the Labor Institute, a nonprofit organization that designs research and educational programs on occupational safety and health, the environment and economics for unions, worker centers, and community organizations. Les has been doing this work since 1975. In addition to Wall Street's War on Workers, he is the author of Defiant German, Defiant Jew, Runaway, Inequality, How to Make $1 Million an Hour, Why Financial Elites Get Away with Siphoning Off America's Wealth, The Looting of America, How Wall Street's Game of Fantasy Finance Destroyed Our Jobs, Pensions, and Prosperity, and What We Can Do About It, and The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor, The Life and Times of Tony Mazzucci. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Les Leopold. All right, Les Leopold. How you doing, sir? You doing good?
I'm doing okay. Considering the political climate of the country and the world, I'm doing okay.
Well, I
can't complain.
Yeah, that makes two of us there, sir. So I greatly appreciate that answer. And it's really, really an honor to talk to you. I know that you have been, and you probably wouldn't label yourself as this, but you've been probably one of the most notable intellectuals when it comes to labor and economics in this country. And so it's really, really a distinction to have you to take the time to come on the podcast. I want to get this started. Normally I do a couple of icebreakers before I get it started. And so the first icebreaker is a quote. So your quote is, "For democracy to endure, our nation must provide stable livelihoods for working people." What does that quote mean to you?
Well, I think that's a fact of life. You can't expect people in this country, the way we're set up, you don't have a job, you don't have anything. You're not at the bottom of the totem pole, you're off the totem. It's very hard to have self-respect in our society without a job. And there is absolutely no reason why everybody can't have a decent job and a decent wage. That's something we can do, but we don't do it. And that's a tragedy. And the longer we don't do it, the longer people feel so insecure in their jobs, or they go through mass layoff after mass layoff. The longer that exists, I think the more fragile democracy becomes, because people say, "Hey, I need to work. I need to earn a living. I need to earn a decent living. But, otherwise, what's this all about?"
Right. And then, so my next icebreaker is something I call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
7.
All right. What do you consider the best way to stay informed about politics, current events, etc.?
That is a very good question and a very tough question. I can only tell you what I do. I'm fortunate. My wife is a professor, so she comes across things, shares them with me. I watch a little bit of TV news, a little bit of CNN. I read the New York Times with a grain of salt. And I get a bunch of different articles sent to me via various news services, Substack and other places. But it's funny, when you get to be a little bit older, when you get to be my age, Erik, what happens is you kind of, you can sift through what sounds true and what doesn't sound true. And you don't BS yourself. In other words, you're questioning even your strongest beliefs, you kind of question them always, because people on the other side of the political spectrum are lobbing stuff, misinformation, disinformation, but you can't blow it all off. You have to kind of think about what's coming at you, and make judgments, constantly make judgments about what's real, what's not real, what's true, what's not true. So there's your question's good. You have to have information coming your way from a variety of sources. And then you have to cut through the BS and try to figure out what's real and what's not real, and constantly question yourself. Don't just blow things away because it upsets you a little bit or you don't like that person. Try to think about it a little bit, because I think what happens is you get stronger in your beliefs, more confident that you have a story to tell when you start writing and talking to other people, etc. Because you've considered the other people's point of view as opposed to just blowing them off. So it's a delicate balance, and it's an interesting question that I really do ask myself all the time. Am I getting enough diverse information to actually write about the things that I want to write about? And I hope that I do. But you need to be questioning yourself as much as taking information in. You got to question yourself so you don't get stuck in a rut, a bubble, where you can't see what other people are thinking and feeling.
Yeah. Talk to the listeners about what the Labor Institute is and why did you feel the need to create it?
Wow, that's what it is. It's an educational operation that designs programs for working people, largely through trade unions, but not exclusively that way, on occupational health and safety, economics, and environmental labor type issues. And we're strictly educational. We don't, work for candidates or anything like that. And we don't try to get involved in union politics. We just try to open up discussions and debates within unions, and we try to develop an informed working people. It's interesting. The start of it was kind of grew out of an internship I had in 1974 with a guy named Tony Mazzocchi, who was a very progressive leader of the oil, chemical, and atomic workers. He's the guy, if you know the Karen Silkwood story at all, a woman who got killed because she was exposing health and safety problems at a nuclear facility in Oklahoma. Just as I was leaving my internship, she came in to talk to Mazzocchi because he was helping her at that particular time. And Mazzocchi said, you know what? I think, the economy was sort of falling apart at that point. We had the Arab oil boycott. It looked like a big recession coming on. There was inflation and unemployment. He says, working people need to know something about economics. Why don't you try to set up a course on economics for workers? I'll get the workers together for a couple of trial runs. You find the people that can put it together. I was not capable of doing that kind of class, but I was a pretty good organizer, and I got the crew together to do that. And it worked pretty well. And guy I was working with, David Gordon, who was a pretty famous economist at the time, has now passed away, died at a young age, actually. He had some connections and was able to raise some money. And we put together a little institute. And I always wanted to have work in a little kind of a cooperative project. I'd seen a bunch of them as I was going through grad school, and I thought, that looks interesting. And I didn't know what to do for a living. I really didn't know what to do for a living. I was totally at a loss. So I thought, okay, let's try this. And, it was touch and go for a long time. I mean, the biggest grants we had for a while was unemployment insurance. We go on unemployment insurance, go back to work. A couple of years later, back on unemployment insurance, back to work. And we got lucky. We got some, we picked up some union clients. We helped them get health and safety government money, which then some of it was funneled towards us to do health and safety. And what really put us on the map was we developed a educational technique that we call the small group activity method. That's a non-lecture technique where working people work in small groups of 4 or 5, tackle information, and have discussions amongst themselves on questions they care about. And it allowed us to train working people as trainers. So we have a big relationship with the United Steelworkers. they have 181 health and safety trainers that use our methodology, workers who do the health and safety training, which is the way it had to be because they know a heck of a lot more health and safety than I do. As you know, as someone who works for a living, the people who are actually on the job know a heck of a lot more than kind of the outside experts that come in, right? They see what's going on in their workplace. So that put us on the map. And then that created room for me to start working on more on the economic educational issues. And it wasn't until Tony Mazzocchi died in 2002 that I tried to write anything. Since I'm on my 8th book now, but I didn't start writing until I didn't have the confidence to write, and I didn't have a story to tell. And then all of a sudden, I realized I do have a story to tell. So that really changed my life. I am very privileged to be able to work someplace that supports my writing habit. So I've got a Substack that comes out roughly every week. It's free, but people seem to be donating every now and then, which is nice. I don't take the money. It goes to these educational programs. And I feel blessed that I have this space to try to, what I think is bring some important information to the public, especially to working people.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into some of the intersection between your work and politics. Why is the conventional wisdom of white working class populism wrong?
Well, if you mean that white working class people are racist, sexist, xenophobic, and what Hillary Clinton called the deplorables, I check that out. And other people that I trust, even who are more statistically proficient than I am, checked it out as well. So what we did is there are these very, very large surveys, voter surveys. They're not polls. They're like these, 50,000, 100,000. One of them tracks 500,000 voters over time. So, and they ask all kinds of questions. They ask 126 questions on social issues. We picked 25 of the most controversial ones, like, should gay and lesbian couples be able to adopt children? Is, same-sex marriage wrong? Always wrong. Or, black people just, more lazy than, Jews and others that came into this country, blah, blah, blah. These really charged, gun control, religious issues, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found, to my great surprise, actually, was in the last 20 years, there's been a remarkable transformation amongst people that we call white working class. And I define that two ways. Bottom 2/3 of the income distribution, plus no college degree, no 2-year degree, no 4-year degree. Maybe a little college, but pretty much high school graduates. And who define themselves as white. That's the group. So a couple issues that really blew my mind. Here's one question. Should gay and lesbian couples be legally permitted to adopt children? 10 years ago, only 38% of white working class people support that position. Now it's 70%. And let me take another one, which I find this one most amazing. And we've double checked this one, which is they asked a question, and this is their wording. Should illegal immigrants who have been here 3 years, paid their taxes, and have not committed a felony crime be permitted to become citizens? So all this stuff about immigration, that one, as it's been going on, that one jumped from 32% 10 years ago, or in 2010, 15 years ago, up to 62% in 2020. Now, we checked this again in a survey that we did with YouGov, and we did 3,000 voters in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Key swing states. Used to be the blue wall. Now, Ohio, the blue has crumbled. And we asked exactly the same question. And it's now up to 63% as of 2025, April 2025. So what's going on here? what's going on, Center for Working Class Politics checked all 126, and what they found was that, yes, indeed, white working class people have gotten more liberal on all these issues, but not as liberal as middle class and upper middle class people. So what's happening is it's a relative thing. They look like they're deplorables compared to where the more highly educated, higher income people have gone. And so I think it's an enormous error, political error, to view people through that deplorable lens. Sure, you're going to run into people all over the place. And by the way, as you probably already know, at all levels of society, you're going to run into people who are racist and are xenophobic. And God knows sexism exists at the highest levels of corporate America. But to write off a whole, 2/3 of the country basically as deplorable is politically suicidal. And my experience with trade unions workers has been, almost every union contract, you probably know this from your work as well, has a big anti-discriminatory clause. No worker shall be discriminated age, race, sex, national origin, religion, and so on. And that's, you can get virtually any working class person to say they believe in that anti-discriminatory clause. Where the argument may come over whether affirmative action is still a good thing or not. There's a lot of debates, and there's an enormous diversity of opinion amongst working people like there is in the country as a whole. So anyway, I'd like to put that one to bed. I'm not going to be able to because it crops up all the time. And I just keep reciting the facts, and hopefully eventually, if I had a bigger megaphone, it might penetrate, but I'm a small fish in a big pond.
So what can the Democrats do to stop writing them off? What would you, if they did listen to you, what would you tell them?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, Eric. The other thing we found in our survey was that 70%, we asked an open-ended question at the beginning. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the Democratic Party? 70% had negative things to say, and a very small percentage connected with like woke stuff. So I think the problem with the Democratic Party is that it's trying to be a coalition between people at the top and working people, and they don't recognize that there's a conflict of interest. They think it's kumbaya, that if we grow the pie, everybody can get more. It's okay for us to go and get billionaires, raise money for billionaires. It's okay to have what they call, the money primary, where before even candidates run in primaries, the game very well in Atlanta, right? They got to raise the money, but it puts upper income people in control. I heard directly from Sean Fain, United Auto Workers president, that his speech at the Democratic Party convention was they tried to edit out stuff that they thought was too anti-corporate because the wealthy people didn't like it. So I think unless you can't bring working people in until you understand that they think that the Democratic Party is owned by elites and wealthy people. So that creates a problem. My colleague at the Center for Working Class Politics has been trying for the last, I don't know how many years now, trying to convince the Democratic Party that the best way to recruit working class people is to take a strong populist economic platform. And by that, so we tested out with them. We tested out in that large survey of 3,000 people. We tested out a new policy that if the government, any corporation that takes government money and has 500 more employees shall not be permitted to do compulsory layoffs. All layoffs have to be voluntary based on buyouts, like they do with, white collar executives. If the Democrats did something like that, that would get the attention of working people that got unemployed due to the free trade agreements that Bill Clinton put into place and are signed and was so proud of, even though a lot of Democrats opposed it. So they have to change their tune on progressive populist planks that may be upsetting to the upper income donors that they seem appear, especially to working people, to appear beholden to. So it's sort of like which side are you on? Are you going to do stuff that's going to directly help working people, or are you going to try to say, oh, it's an opportunity society? All we should do is give everybody a fair chance at the starting line, and then, let the billionaires be billionaires because they're just growing the pie. It's tough. Eric, it isn't going to be easy. It's going to take some work. It took 40 years to alienate working class people to the degree they're alienated now. It's going to take some time to change that.
Okay. All right. In your book, Runaway, Inequality, you wrote, the arc of capitalism does not bend toward justice. We must bend it. How can that be done through public policy?
Yeah, I think we're seeing this play out now in real time. During the Cold War, the idea of democracy and capitalism working hand in hand to prevent communism and totalitarianism from spreading was incredibly successful. And you could see the communist authoritarian model collapsed. But there were a lot of theorists that were saying, if you look closely at corporate design, they're not democracies, right? They're they're dictatorships. Unless there's a union there that sort of balances things off. In general, the boss gets to tell you what to do. They can fire you for any reason they want, as long as it doesn't violate discriminatory laws that are on the books. And you know how weak they are in many cases, and what kind of effort it takes to try to beat them back. Okay, so there's a tension there. And a guy like Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal and big supporter of Trump, he believes that there should be a kind of a technological, almost like a dynasty. There should be a technological control of the country, that democracy doesn't work. And so what you're seeing is now the tension between capitalism and democracy is stretching the democratic order. The idea of running roughshod over. I mean, look, we now have a president who doesn't even pay attention to Congress anymore. We have a Republican Party who doesn't even hold them accountable for taking away their powers. So there is. How does public policy change this? I think we have to go back to the lessons of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 50s, and even into the 60s. There was a balance, a growing balance between labor and capital. Unions were strong enough to tame capital. And the public policy that would make the most difference would be allowing people who want to be in unions to get into unions. A labor law reform, it used to be 1 out of 3 private sector workers were in a labor union. That was in 1955. Now it's 1 out of 10. And as a result, that balance that tames corporate America, that tames the tendency to be autocratic, that balance has fallen apart. And so public policies that would rebuild the power of working people to tame corporate power would be enormously helpful. And, Northern Europe has done a much better job than that. Sweden, 90% of the people are trade unions. And it's I think, a more vibrant democracy. Every country's got problems, and nothing's perfect. Nothing ever will be perfect, and we have to live with imperfection. But I don't like the direction we're headed into. So I think your question is right. What policies would bring us back? I think number one policy would be giving working people more power to tame the excesses of corporate America. Peter Thiel would have a different tune if whatever company he now owns, if the workers were unionized, he'd have to deal with them. His attitude towards democracy would change.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions. They're really two separate issues, but they kind of go along the same theme. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, the average gap between the top 100 CEOs at low-wage companies and their median workers is at a ratio of 632 to 1. The Economic Policy Institute reported that the typical Black worker earned 24.4% less per hour than the typical white worker. So my question is, how do we get to this point? How do we let these gaps happen? And are there any ways that we can narrow them?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of ways to narrow that, the overall wage gap between the top and the average worker. The numbers we have are a little higher than that's even higher than the 632. We take the top 100 and compare it to the median worker across the country. So, there's they have tremendous wealth extraction games. The trick is to get the money before they get it, because trying to get it after they get it through taxing, et cetera, is very hard. You can do some of that, but they can hide the money. They can put it, they don't have to cash in. They can keep their stocks and bonds, take loans out against them, and never have to pay capital gains and all this kind of stuff. They have so many tricks. You and I can't even begin to fathom. They're paying their accountants and lawyers $200,000 an hour for a reason. They're hiding their money, basically, from the tax collector. And that's an age-old problem. Goes back like thousands of years. Wealthy people do that. Okay. So getting it beforehand would be anything you could do to increase the minimum wage would have a tremendous impact. If you could get the minimum wage up to $15, $20 an hour or higher even, that would help. Eliminating stock buybacks, which is when a company basically squeezes the workforce, takes the cash, buys back its own shares, boosts the price of the stock artificially. This used to be called stock manipulation. It was basically illegal until 1982 when the Reagan administration deregulated it, and it stayed. Now 60. It used to be limit was 2% of corporate profits could go to these stock buybacks. Now it's 60%. It's pathetic. You could just eliminate that. Say back to 2%. And another one is this whole leverage buyout thing, where I don't know, Eric, how did you and I miss this game? You buy up a company. Look, watch this. This is what they do. They set up a fund with other people's money. They then buy up a company with debt, and then they place the debt on the company that they bought. So now they own a company more or less for free. Then they milk the company for all it's worth. 4 or 5 years, a much higher percentage of those companies go under, unemploy everybody. They've walked off, with billions and tens of billions across the economy. In 1986, Dan Rostenkowski, who was head of the Ways and Means Committee and a Democrat out of Chicago, out of your hometown, he said, "Hey, we can't let them do this, because what they're doing is that money is tax deductible when they put all that debt on the company. Why don't we just say you can't, everything over $500,000 is going to get taxed?" Oh, they went nuts. They jumped all over him. They claimed he caused a crash in the stock market. But that's the kind of stuff you have to do. You got to stop the extraction, the wealth extraction, and also make it a huge number of people want to be in unions. Like 70% of young people now think that under 30 think that unions are a great thing, but they can't get into them. So that's another way of what we call pre-distributional change in the gap. Now, the more difficult question you ask is, what accounts for the wage gap between black and white, or black, brown, and white? There's like 3 tiers, and it's been there for a long time. Between, when unions were growing, that gap up until the late 60s was actually shrinking dramatically, because more and more people of color were getting into trade unions, and they were getting out of the professions. See, it's not, there's some, people working side by side getting paid different amounts based on their color. There's not a lot of that goes on anymore. What it is, you've got an excess of people of color in the low income jobs and not in the more middle and higher income jobs. So, but that's changing, especially in unions. My wife teaches apprentices in union electrical worker apprentices. In New York, they have to get a 2-year degree to become journeymen. And you now look, that used to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was a lily white union. And, if the people who go on the job get paid well. Now, 40% of her class is, those classes now, and 800 people go through this program every year, are people of color. So that's a great way to start narrowing the gap. Actually, I hate to keep coming back to this, but the more you can promote unionism, the more you'll close the gap, because the people who are in unions in the low income jobs have seen a dramatic increase in their pay. Service Employees International Union in California, the home healthcare workers got, 70,000 of them most of them are people of color, got a huge increase. So I think those are the kinds of changes. And again, it all comes back to rebalancing the power between corporations and working people. And I think the days of overt discrimination in unions are over. I think my union, United Steelworkers, just elected a black woman as president. Communication Workers Union, a union, which is a pretty white union, just elected a black man as president of the union. So, the world has changed for the better, but we have to empower where the most important changes in that gap can take place. It ain't going to happen until we force it the rest of the way. It used to be 40% gap. Now it's 24%. It should be going down, down, down every year as we unionize and pass minimum wage laws for the lower income workers, because that's where the problem is. We still have a disproportionate number of people of color in the low income jobs.
Yeah, and you won't get any argument with me about unions. My dad was Amalgamated Transit. My mom was AFSCME. I was a Teamster at one time in my life, as well as UFCW. So, and CW.
Well, you got the whole family there. You got the whole AFL there.
Yeah. So we believe in unions. And growing up in Chicago, I mean, that's almost like a rite of passage to have a union job. So, last question. Do you think American voters have figured out that President Trump has given them false economic hope? And will that realization show up in the midterm elections?
I would like to think yes, but what I'm worried about is the Democrats shooting themselves in the foot, right? Because it's always a comparative thing. So I'm not happy about this shutdown, government shutdown. I think the strategy is going to backfire on the Democrats, and some surveys are already showing it. Believe it or not, support for the Republican Party has actually gone up, not down, during the shutdown. So I'm worried about that negative image of the Democratic Party. We found out in a survey, I'm sorry to have to keep going back, but it's really fresh information. I don't think anybody's ever done this before. In those 4 states, if you run a Democrat versus an independent saying exactly the same thing, exactly the same messages, the Democrat starts 8% behind. In Ohio, it's 16%. The only state where it's roughly even is in Pennsylvania. For reasons we're not sure exactly why. We're still investigating that. But there's a huge penalty for just being a Democrat. The image of a Democrat is so tarnished in those states that I worry that the anti-Trump thing isn't going to carry over as much as people hope. Then that's one problem. Second problem is you got the gerrymandering that's going on. The Republicans are, basically violating tradition. Instead of every 10 years redistricting, now they're redistricting now. The Supreme Court is letting them blow apart minority majority districts that allow for representation of people of color, blowing those apart. So that's another problem. On the plus side, though, is all congressional races are really about who's running. And if in the purple districts or the swing districts, there are just strong candidates. And if those candidates dare to run against their own party, the Democrats would be, given our survey, the Democrats would be very wise to run against the Democratic establishment. To say, hey, I'm going to clean up. I'm going to get those billionaires out of the Democratic Party. I'm going to fight for working people every single day. This is what I'm going to do. And one issue that I think, not only my pet issue about these mass layoffs, but the one issue that I think they could use to get ahead is they should do it right now. They should put a bill in that says no trading in stocks and bonds by any public official in Congress or their families, and put criminal penalties on it if you do it. Because that will, right now, the Democrats have been, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't let that come to a vote. I mean, her attitude was, what's wrong with that? And the rest of us would say, obviously what's wrong with it? You have all this inside information. You're trading. We don't even have stocks and bonds to trade. And what's going on here? So if I were running for office, I would bring that up every single day. I'm going to change the Democratic Party, and I'm going to force the Republicans also to support this. It's such an obvious which side are you on kind of thing. So I'm hoping there are candidates with some guts. And these races, congressional races, really are like people will say, Congress sucks, but I like my congressman. The difference between the national perception and the local perception is great. So there's hope for the Democrats, and there are problems on the Democrats. I'm not a great prognosticator, but right now I don't like what the Democrats are doing right now to distinguish themselves. I don't understand why they didn't just let these tremendous increases in Obamacare premiums, just let them happen. Let the Republicans own it. Say, hey, this is what they've done to you. Your premiums just went up threefold, fourfold. Why did they think that they would get points for trying to stop it by shutting down the government? Anyway, that's just me. I'm hoping I'm wrong and that I'm just misreading it. I don't think I am.
Well, no, I mean, your validation is and at this point, 30 days into a shutdown, I think, those are always the legitimate concerns. How long can the protests happen, right? When does it get to a point where it's a point of no return as far as getting the benefit out of taking that stand? So that's legit. And then also to highlight the point you were making about the stocks, that's why Raphael Warnock is a senator in Georgia as opposed to Kelly Loeffler. Kelly Loeffler was literally married to the New York Stock Exchange. and so it was like, and she got caught up in some insider trading because it's like, that's her pillow talk, literally. And so Raphael was able to play that. And he got, and people in Georgia, didn't matter whether it was in downtown Atlanta or downtown Milledgeville, people responded to that. And that's how he got in there. So there's a lot of legitimacy in what you're saying. And I really am glad that you and others are out there at least trying to let people know what's going on. If people want to be able to reach out to you more, you mentioned your Substack. Kind of talk about the title of that and how else can people reach out to you. I know your latest book is called Wall Street's War on Workers, which some of the questions I got came from that. So just this is the time where you make your pitch and tell people how they can reach out.
Okay, great. So you can follow me. I mean, you can get my Substack for free. You can sign up at I think it's, if you go to Les Leopold at Substack, you'll find it. And I try to get that going. I'm actually working on a new book now, which I hope, Erik, you'll have me on again when it should be out in a few months. Look, right now the working title is The Billionaires Have Two Parties, We Need One of Our Own. And it's really designed to, how do we deal with the fact that the Democratic Party is virtually dead in 130 congressional districts across the country where they lose by 25% or more. They're not a viable institution. And some of those districts. My God, some of those districts. And I think a challenge could be made in those districts if we can't carry the baggage the Democratic Party do. But anyway, that'll be a controversial book. So if you want to reach me directly, just send a message to, you can get me at lesleopold@aol.com. I'm not afraid to answer email. Hopefully I won't get trolled. And, but check out my Substack. It seems to be a nice community of people who are reading it. And then when the new book's together, I'll make sure everybody in Substack knows how to get a hold of it. And hopefully I'll get back on with Erik and we can talk about it.
Well, one of the rules is that once you have been on the show, you have an open invitation to come back. So if you're writing a new book, we'll definitely make sure that we'll get you on to talk about that. Again, Les Leopold, it's really been an honor to talk to you. And I'm glad that we've had this chance to interact. And I definitely want to get you back on any way I can. So again, thank you for coming on this time.
Thank you for having me. Actually, the honor is mine. It's really, really great to have met you, and I look forward to working with you again in the future.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. And we are back. And so now it is time for my next guest, Veronica Cardenas. Veronica Cardenas Esquire is an award-winning immigration attorney, entrepreneur, and first-generation Latina committed to bringing humanity and justice to immigration law. As the daughter of Colombian and Peruvian immigrants and a proud mother of 3, she understands firsthand the challenges and resilience that define the immigrant experience. Nearly 13 years as an assistant chief counsel for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Veronica advised DHS stakeholders, trained prosecutors, and worked with agencies like the U.S. Department of Justice and USCIS to navigate complex immigration cases. However, after witnessing the injustices within the system, she made the bold decision to resign in 2023 and fully dedicate herself to defending and empowering immigrants. She is the founder of Cardenas Immigration Law, where she provides strategic, human-centered legal representation and humanigration, a mentorship program that educates immigration attorneys on how to serve their clients with both expertise and empathy. A recognized thought leader and media contributor, Veronica has been featured in Business Insider, HuffPost, The Hill, ABC, MSNBC, Business Insider, and many more. Her mission is clear: to reshape the immigration system through advocacy, mentorship, and education, because immigration is not just about policies, it's about people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Veronica Cardenas. All right, Veronica Cardenas. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
I'm doing well today. How about you?
I'm doing lovely, even more so because I've got someone with your expertise and passion on the show to talk about your experience dealing with immigration law, especially during this time. So I'm really, really glad that you were able to make the time to do this. So I do a couple of things I call icebreakers to kind of start the interview. And the first icebreaker is a quote I want you to respond to. It says, immigration isn't just about policies, it's about people. Every immigrant story deserves to be heard, valued, and fought for. What does that quote mean to you?
That is the foundation of what immigration should be. And we have strayed so much from that to, the way that we call immigrants, categorizing them by numbers and trying to just fit them into a policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely understand that, because when we get into bureaucracies, and you've worked for the federal government, so you understand, it's easy to try to lump human beings into a file folder, right? Instead of dealing with them on a case by case basis. So I'm glad that you have that sensitivity to deal with that. Now, the other icebreaker is what I call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
7.
All right. What do you consider the best way to stay informed about politics, current events, etc.?
Definitely read the news, watch the news, listen to podcasts. But the best way to stay informed, if it's an issue you care so deeply about, is to try to get that information firsthand. Because when you read it through someone else's experience, you're losing a part of that feel factor. And for example, if it's immigration specific, right? Go to an immigration court hearing, sit in that hearing, because then you can feel what it really is like to be a person in those shoes. And that's the only way I think change is going to happen. So try to get that information firsthand.
Yeah. So why did you decide to practice immigration law? What motivated you to go into this specific area?
I don't think at the time it was much of a conscious choice. I went to law school because I was an English major in undergrad and I didn't want to graduate yet. And so I was like, what can I do to add some more years in school? And when I went to law school, I feel like that was the first time that I was really met with crossroads. I I almost failed my first year. And it was in writing, legal writing. And my professor was like, you have to decide if you're going to continue pushing a car off a cliff, like a $50,000 car off the cliff, or if you're just going to give up and try to find something else to do. And at that point, my parents supported me in every way that they could, but they weren't paying for me to go to law school. So I really had to think about that decision. And I decided I'm going to do this no matter what it takes. And so at that point, I was just, studying, doing extra help, doing everything I could to make sure that my grades were where they needed to be so that I could continue going to law school. And through that process, I came across a friend who was working as an intern in the office of the principal legal advisor, which are the attorneys for ICE. And he got me an internship there. I graduated around 2010 when there was a recession. There were no jobs. And so I came into my third year without a job. And it happened that at that year, my third year, because Homeland Security was still fairly new after it was created in 2001, they didn't yet have their own honors program. And so the year that I graduated was the year that they started the honors program. I applied, I got in. And so I was just happy to be working with the federal government and happy that I had a job.
Yeah, I understand. How complex is the immigration system, and do you think that level of complexity is fair?
That is an excellent question. And I think the level of complexity is on purpose to make the system so difficult for people who want to follow the rules, like it sets them up for failure. And so every time I hear the public say, well, they should just do it the legal way, they should just wait online. Like, I wish it were that simple. People don't have a basic understanding of immigration law. They think, oh, I can just apply, wait, and get it. And it's not that way. People don't understand that for asylum, it was something that was created after World War II when America closed its doors to Jews who were fleeing persecution. And we said at that moment, no, you can't come in because there were no asylum laws. And so the U.S. joined many other countries in deciding that this was such a horrendous point in history that each country has to do their job in taking refugees from other countries when it's necessary. And the only way to claim asylum is literally being on U.S. soil. You can't claim asylum from the country where you're facing persecution. So that is a very big misunderstanding of asylum laws.
So what else do you think average Americans get wrong about immigrants?
The illegal part. The first statement you asked is like, people versus policy. Unfortunately, based on the color of your skin and where you were born, your identity is political. Because Americans don't think to say, maybe that person is allegedly illegal, right? Like proven, like you're innocent until proven guilty. And in immigration law, that same level of understanding is not extended. People are just guilty. You're just illegal because you were born somewhere. And so understanding that there is a pathway because you overstayed a visa or because you entered the United States, that is only a fraction of the picture. There's a whole big other picture which shows what is the defense to that, which is U.S. immigration law. And that's the part where I think Americans lose sight of, maybe don't really understand. And so for them, it's an open and shut case. You came in, you overstayed your visa, now you're illegal.
So you were with Homeland Security as a prosecutor. And in 23, you decided, enough of that. As somebody that was in the system and was dealing with a lot of those cases from the government standpoint, what made you decide, no, I don't want to do that. I want to help people this go around. What kind of changed your mind?
Yeah, the system, I started in 2010 under Obama. And I was in New York City, where a lot of the cases that were going forward through the immigration courts, they were winning their cases. There was prosecutorial discretion. Obama had ran on, we're prosecuting felons, not families, not children, not mom and pops. And that was true in New York City. I can only speak because every jurisdiction is different. But where I was at the time, that was the case. We were closing out cases for people who didn't have relief because they also should not have been deported. And cases were being granted to those who should be granted cases. And I know a lot of people say, well, on the flip side, Obama deported over 2 million people, and that's true. And it's not a perfect system. It was never a perfect system, but it was more humane. At least we were able to consider a person, not just for one snapshot in time of how they crossed into the U.S., but what life have they built here? Do they have children? What equities? Do they have businesses, right? We could take that person as a whole. Once Trump came into office, that's when everything changed. And now it was a one size fits all. So it didn't matter if a person was 15 years old, crossed the border at 2 years old with his family. He was being treated the same way as someone who was like a drug trafficker. And that just felt very unfair. It also felt during that time that the cases were already prejudged. The law was built to deny. And so judges couldn't decide on the merits of each case. They couldn't consider that person as a whole. And at the same time, trial attorneys, the prosecutors, we no longer had that discretion that we once had. Every case had to go forward, whether it was a 16-year-old without a lawyer or, the drug trafficker. They were being treated the same. And at that point is when it really was painful to be in a position where you had to say, I'm opposing relief in every case, because I didn't feel like legally that was the right thing to do. And that lasted 4 years. It was very difficult to work in that administration. I feel like when I started my career in 2010, straight out of law school, I was so young. My mindset at the time was, I'm going to work for the government. I'm going to eventually become a judge, and then I'll retire, get my pension. That was my plan. When Trump became president, working under that administration, it kind of threw a wrench in my plan. And I tried to hold on because, you think of your years of service, this will pass. And then after that administration, Biden came in and COVID hit and, the world shut down. For me, it was reevaluating what's important. And I felt like no matter how the system would change, it could not change to the place where it was before under Obama, because Trump had already done too much damage. And that's when I really realized that change is not going to come from the inside. It's going to come from the outside. And I want to be on the side of change.
Yeah. During my brief time being an immigration law paralegal, I went, I went down to New Orleans with our attorney to sit in on cases. I had to go to Gina in Louisiana to actually tour the detention facility, all that stuff. But the thing that bothered me was when we had to look into the Department of State and look into the visa thing and just see that, a lot of people made me realize that a lot of people had filed their documents like they were supposed to. But because they didn't fall into a certain category, they got caught up in the quota. And so it's like, you could have filed, and this was in the early 2000s when I was doing it. So let's just say you filed in 2007 and the State Department that hadn't gotten to the year 2004 yet, right? So, it's like there's a lot of people that file their paperwork, but for whatever reason, their case hasn't even been heard yet. Their application hasn't even been reviewed yet. So how can we fix that problem? How can we get, because there were some countries that was like maybe 2 or 3 years, and other countries there was like 10. So how do we fix that?
Yeah. And when I think about the immigration problem, it's a balance. It's a scale. On one side, you have the pathways to relief, like people who are married, people who have children here, like people who can adjust based on family or work or a humanitarian purpose. And then on the other side of that scale, you have deportation proceedings. In a perfect world, one where immigration actually means something, those scales need to be balanced. People who have a means to lawfully stay in the US should be able to go through that without having a deportation process just come snatch them up and say, too bad, you don't have relief right now. That has to be balanced. That has to be changed. And there are ways to do that. And Biden did try some ways to do that, like offering people who are married to a lawful permanent resident or U.S. citizen to temporarily stay here with protection while USCIS, which is the agency in charge of that, or the Department of State, figures out the visa issue. Because the visa issue and the allotment of those visas, I think what you said was like really good. It was like the quota problem. That has been an issue that has not been updated since like the 60s. And so we're really running on an outdated system. No politician has wanted to touch immigration because of the reality that illegal immigration pays. Everyone benefits from illegal immigration. They're here when there's work shortages, when people don't want to pay full price for things. You find someone who could do it for a fraction of the cost, pay them under the table. That saves. And then when there's times like this where someone is coming into office and now everybody's upset with immigration, or they're upset about the price of things, they're upset that with the economy, immigration saves the day again, saying, okay, it's their problem. Now we're going to be tough on immigration. And being tough on immigration also raises poll numbers in the past. Like right now, we're seeing that the way that this administration has been dealing with enforcement is not favored. But, every presidency has not had the focus to really solve the issue because it wasn't an issue that America wanted to solve. Obama tried with, and so many people with the Dreamers Act, people who've been brought to this country who have studied here since they were young. At least give them a pathway. If we're going to carve it for someone, carve it for the children. And that failed in Congress.
Yeah. And even, you said studied is like, some of them have joined the military and have served and defended our country. And it would just seem like that would be a no-brainer to reward somebody who at least signed up for service to the country. But I guess we can go down the weeds on that one. In an op-ed in The Guardian, you stated that the government is sanctioning a culture of fear where teachers, neighbors, and even classmates feel justified in weaponizing deportation. So do you think the level of force being shown to enforce a misdemeanor charge of being undocumented is excessive? And what are some ways for citizens and immigrants to stand up against it?
Yeah, I definitely think that the use of force right now is excessive. We are seeing, I try to take small doses of the videos, the media, because I see this every day in my day to day. And I didn't really actually realize how much it was affecting me until one day a client was telling me how scared he was to show up for an interview because he thought he was going to be detained, and the chances of him being detained were high. And so it's hard not to take on other people's fear. And it's hard not to let that affect you. I can't like switch it off and then go home to my family and be like, nothing happened. When I wrote that was like, I think just as Trump was coming in or during like early Trump. And I see that, yes, there was a lot of people turning in on each other. But now I see that there's also a lot of good in Americans, like, running human chains so that when people exit schools, they're not going to be picked up or their children are not going to be separated in those places. So I do have a lot of hope for America now. And we see in Chicago, the CBP, like chief officer there, who's having to go to court every day at 6 p.m. to tell the federal judge that the use of force is appropriate because they were throwing like tear gas at children when they were on the way to a Halloween parade at their school. They are shooting pellets at pastors. They are pulling people out of cars with such force that their ribs are broken. And when I see comments to those stories like, well, why didn't that person just get out of the car? Why didn't they just walk away? That is the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, why does ICE or CBP, no other federal agency has that level of like a hall pass to be like, no, any other agency does that, there's an investigation being opened. There's looking into, how did this happen? ICE has had a hall pass for so long that they don't feel like they have to justify that. And so holding them to these standards, this federal judge, this decision is something that we should all be looking at. She ordered CBP and ICE to wear cameras on them because also like the stories don't match up. Where there was this one man who dropped off his children at school and he was driving, he was shot to death in his car. And CBP said that, or ICE had said that he tried to run them over, but now evidence is showing that that's not true. And so America does need to be curious right now and to see what is the truth. And the way that we do that collectively is by filming when we see some injustice happen. Film it and post it, because one person can be filming from another angle, you film from another angle, and then in the end, all those angles are important if that person brings forward a case in federal court. I know New York has also started to do that, and they have a database where people can post their footage or post it on social media because these are real-time accounts, and even if they're not used in a federal court, at least our children, the people that come after us, will be able to see what happened during this time.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to wonder how the Border Patrol is actually in Chicago, because I was under the impression that the Border Patrol their jurisdiction was no more than 100 miles from the American border, and Chicago is not a border city. How are they even getting around that?
Yeah, and that is an excellent point, and I think that's something we're all thinking about and wondering. CBP is supposed to be stationed at the borders and at the airport. They are in charge of anything coming in and leaving the U.S. That is their job. This administration, and because that's their job, they have a great authority. They can arrest without a warrant. Like we're all discussing ICE's, administrative warrant. They don't even need that. They can search anyone, even an American citizen. They can go through their phone. They can search. The authority that they have at the border is so great, and there's little oversight. If they, violate someone's rights, the fact that they're going to get sued or reprimanded is very low. And so the Trump administration is bringing that culture. Like we've already seen the damage from ICE, but CBP is another level, and they're bringing that to our backyards, to our schools, to our churches. To me, this is intentional, and we don't know exactly yet how this administration plans to use this, but I feel from everything that I've been seeing is that this administration is trying to move those authorities that that CBP can exercise at the border into the U.S., where there is going to be this, I can arrest you and nothing will happen because of XYZ. We're also seeing this in new immigration cases where people who have been living in the U.S. for 20 years are really getting stopped. They're Amazon drivers. The trucks are getting stopped. They're being asked for identification. When they show a license, they're like, no, I need to see your papers. Do you have a passport? Do you have a green card? I need to see it. And then if they don't produce it, they're being arrested. We know that there's over 146 100 people that have been arrested, American citizens who have been arrested and caught up in this. And so it's unclear how they're doing it. We're pushing back in federal courts, but federal courts take time to issue decisions.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the H-1B visas, the fees being raised?
I think that is very sad because there's a lot of people that would qualify for that, where employers would love to sponsor them. And now because of the fees, they can't do that, or they're not willing to do that. And so that means that there's a whole class of people now who would have otherwise had status are now going to be left in limbo and either self-deport or try to find another way to adjust their status.
So have you lost any clients because of the fees being raised, or y'all working through what y'all need to do?
I don't do H-1Bs, but I have had a lot of referrals from people who would have had an H-1B, but now their employer doesn't want to sponsor them. They've been living in the U.S. for years, and now they're trying to find an alternative.
I got you. All right. So who would you like to have a one-on-one meeting with concerning immigration? Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, or President Trump? And what would you say to them to try and relax their hardline position?
So that was a really interesting question, and I had to think about this one. And I feel when there's an issue of values, you can't change people's minds. If I were to walk into a conversation with any of them, they would just be talking to talk because they like to be right and they like to hear themselves talk. They don't care about Americans. They don't care about humanity. Wasn't Noam the one that killed her dog?
Yeah.
To be sitting in a room with someone who can be so heinous for me is just, it would be a waste of my time and it would drain my energy. And instead, I feel like the people that I would want to talk to are college students, are Americans who are on the fence. Because I've had people come to me with all these raids that are going on in warehouses. There was this one person who was writing a story and she called me and she was like, I'm trying to understand this. They had a warrant for one person. They arrested 596 people. How does that happen? And she was really trying to understand because when she called DHS told them, we had a tip. All of these people are working illegally. We needed to arrest anybody. And then when she asked if they had a warrant, they had time. This was during the early stages where Trump was like, we're only going after the worst of the worst. I think one person who they had a warrant had a crime. No one else had a crime. And so she was really trying to understand. And those are the people I want to talk to. The people who are really trying to understand and make sense of this because they hear one thing and then they're seeing all the stuff that's going on and they don't know where the truth is. Those are the people that I want to speak to.
Now, before I get to my last question, I do want to ask you this. So during the 24 campaign, immigration came up a lot. And, the president said, certain groups of immigrants were eating animals and pets, actually. And, they had a whole convention where everybody was sitting in the aisle saying mass deportation now. As somebody that does this work for a living and having worked on both sides, what was your gut reaction to that? Did that make you angry? Did that make you more resolved? How did you approach it where, now to be in the state where you are? What was your thought process during that whole campaign?
I felt like I saw 10 steps ahead. I knew where this type of attitude was going to lead us. And that's why I took to writing and I started to write about this issue because history does repeat itself. And when we look past history in the U.S., every time there's this sentiment of blaming, of animosity towards the other, right? We've had different races, different countries be recycled through who the other is and who's going to be the scapegoat at this point. it builds a lot of anger, a lot of violence, a lot of divisiveness within our nation. And so I knew at that point that we were heading here if this administration was going to win, especially because what he had started in the first term, a lot of the things, a lot of the decisions, we were like, this is so illegal. Like he would, like the Muslim ban, the first one he wrote, it took him like 3 tries to get it right. The first one, when I read it, I was still working at Homeland Security and I was like, this can't be real. Like we didn't even get like an inbox, an email saying, hey, this just passed. Stop people at the airports. Cause it was just like, it just hit and agents are like, what is this? What do we do with this, counsel? And I'm like, this seems illegal. Like, what am I supposed to tell people to do? Like based on an unlawful, something that just sounded so unlawful. It did get struck down, but I could see where we were going. And I could see that this administration was going to push the boundaries as far as they could, which is what's happening. So I didn't think that it would be so bad so fast. It's been a rough few months. Every day something changes. And so having a community where you can lean on has been very helpful because no one's getting through this alone. Like you need to lean on your community right now, whatever issue is important to you that's affecting you. Like there's so many, right? Like LGBTQ plus, people just lost SNAP benefits. Like there's parts of this administration that's going to touch people in different ways. For me, it's immigration, but just lean on your community and stand with each other right now.
All right, so I want to close this out on something positive. Talk to the audience about the concept of humanigration and the work that you're doing around that concept.
Yeah. So when I was at ICE, I saw that people who were going through the system, because it's so complex, really didn't understand it. Even when they had lawyers, people don't generally know how to testify. People don't generally understand what the judge wants, especially when you don't speak that language. There's an interpretation going, but sometimes you may not even understand that because it's moving so fast. And so, like a regular first hearing, master calendar hearing can last 2 minutes and all that time is talking. So it's very complicated. So I wanted to create a system where people who were going through the process could actually understand it. We could slow it down so that they understood what was required of them. And then also through that, I started to come across lawyers who needed mentorship, who needed help. And so that's how Humanigration was born. I mentor new lawyers who are looking to make the transition, and even older lawyers, veteran lawyers who just want to work in community. We have a large community now. We talk to each other. We help each other, because it is a very difficult field. Things are moving so fast. So it's been great. Like I've had a lot of good connections through that mentorship program.
Now, have you encountered people who say were licensed lawyers in other countries and for some reason they're now admitted to the bar? Have you been working with those individuals to kind of help out with maybe not necessarily your firm, but, kind of helping them get along? Because we had situations like that in Mississippi where we had people who went to law school in Mexico and for some reason they couldn't pass the bar, and then they get hired by a firm, and so their job is paralegal, but they're just as qualified as any other attorney that we're working with at the firm. Have you encountered that and you incorporating them into this process?
I generally work with either lawyers or people who are going through the process, but with lawyers in the law firms, like a lot of lawyers are like, well, can you train staff, right? Because the paralegals need to know what's going on in court so that their applications can be stronger, so the statements can be stronger. And so, yes, we work with like the whole firm and anyone who wants to join. The classes are through a 3-month time period. We meet every Fridays. And so it's like for an hour and a half, you're with a group of like 12 people. Everyone's learning, asking questions. So it is good to learn in community like that.
So is this a nonprofit separate from your firm, or is this incorporated in what your firm does?
Yeah, it's a for-profit, but it's separated from my firm. So my firm is Cardenas Immigration Law, and then the educational platform is Humanigration. So right now I'm also starting to do videos about like the whole court process so that people can like go to YouTube and look at that video and find out, like, I have a master calendar. What does that even mean? What questions am I going to be asked? And it'll give you like a breakdown about that. Or if you're preparing for like your trial date, your merits, how do I prepare for that? What evidence do I need?
So if people want to get plugged into what you're doing, either at the law firm or with Humanigration, or just want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
They could visit humanigration.com. There I have like all my contact information. Also, they could follow me on Instagram at humanigration. My contact info is all on there.
Well, Veronica Cardenas, I've stated before, you're doing the Lord's work as somebody that tries to be balanced. I've had people who have been Border Patrol agents, not proponents of the immigration, but I have a soft spot for people who are trying to do the right thing and get people in the right way and to help them navigate through this process, which has gotten much worse in this current time we're in. So like I said, again, you're doing the Lord's work, and it's really an honor to meet you. And it's even more of an honor for you to come on the podcast. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for the invite.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, we are back. And so now it is time for my next guest, John Bonifaz. John Bonifaz is a constitutional attorney and the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People. Mr. Bonifaz previously served as the executive director and general counsel of the National Voting Rights Institute, an organization he founded in 1994, and as the legal director of Voter Action, a national election integrity organization. He has been at the forefront of key voting rights and democracy campaigns in the United States for more than 3 decades. Mr. Bonifaz's work has included pioneering a series of court challenges, applying political equality principles that have helped to redefine the campaign finance question as a basic voting rights issue of our time, helping to lead key election protection cases across the country, and helping to lead historical legal challenges under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to insurrectionists seeking to run for re-election. He is the co-author with former American University law professor and now Congressman Jamie Raskin of 2 seminal law review articles, one at Yale Law and Policy Review in 1993 and one at Columbia Law Review in 1994, and of the Wealth Primary, Campaign Fundraising, and the Constitution, which all argue that the current campaign finance system violates the equal protection rights of non-wealthy candidates and voters. Mr. Bonifaz is the co-author with Ron Fine and Ben Clements of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump, published in 2018 with a foreword by John Nichols. Mr. Bonifaz is also the author of Warrior King, published by Nation Books in 2004, with a foreword by the late Congressman John Conyers Jr., which chronicles the 2003 case in which he served as lead counsel challenging the U.S. military invasion of Iraq as illegal under the War Powers Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Mr. Bonifaz has also served as co-counsel in international human rights and environmental litigation, including litigation to hold the Chevron Texaco oil company accountable for its widespread destruction of the Ecuadorian Amazon. Mr. Bonifaz is a 1992 cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School and a 1999 recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, John Bonifaz. John Bonifaz. How you doing, sir? You doing good?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, Erik.
Well, it's an honor to have you on, and especially to talk about a lot of the issues that your organization is diving into. I checked out your website and stuff, and I said, it's pretty. Well, I won't say radical, but pretty aggressive. I'll say pretty aggressive agenda. Kind of reminds me of me when I was in the legislature. I used to introduce like 150 bills a year when I was in the legislature. So I like people that have ideas. So John, we're going to start off the interview like I normally do with guests with what we call an icebreaker segment. So the first part of the icebreaker segment is that I need you to respond to a quote.
Okay.
All right. So here's your quote. The pressing question before the nation today is whether it is we the people or we the corporations and big money interests. This is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. This is a deeply American issue. Whatever our political differences may be, we all share the common vision of government of, by, and for the people. What's your thoughts on that comment?
Well, I certainly agree that it is a pressing issue for our nation today. And no question, since the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC, the day of that ruling, we launched Free Speech for People in January 2010. That was the ruling sweeping away a century of precedent, barring corporate money in elections, equating corporations as people with political speech rights. Since that ruling, that question has become even more relevant because now corporations, through their general treasury funds, can dominate our elections, can pour hundreds of millions of dollars into our elections, and that has become a threat to the integrity of our political process and our democracy. So one major fight on our hands is to overturn that ruling via constitutional amendment that would overturn not just Citizens United, but a prior ruling known as Buckley v. Vallejo in 1976 by the Supreme Court, which equated money as speech and allowed for this system of unlimited campaign spending by the wealthy interests to drown out the voices of ordinary voters. So this is a fight for our democracy, no question about it. But there are also many other fights today that we're facing as a result of the corruption and abuse of power coming out of the White House and as a result of voter suppression and voter intimidation schemes around the country.
All right. So now the second part of the icebreaker is called 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
You mean the number of questions I'll take?
No, just give me a number.
Oh, I see. 5.
Okay. What do you think should this, okay, let me start over. What do you think we should decide at the local or state levels versus the federal level?
Well, I certainly think the state and local governments have a power and responsibility to run their elections. That's the way our system works. It's a decentralized system. But I also think that there needs to be overall guarantees from the federal government, from the Constitution, that there will be a fair election process, that no voters will be blocked from casting their vote, and that votes will be counted as cast. So I think it's a meeting of different interests here between what state and localities have a right and duty to run in terms of their elections, but also what the federal government has a right to do. Now, when it comes to mobilizing the military into our cities, we're seeing a direct attack on state and local authorities, where this idea that now the federal government, through this Trump administration, can send troops into American cities to address law enforcement matters is contrary to what the Constitution allows and contrary to the federalism system that we have of states having the ability to run their own localities and their jurisdictions.
Yeah. Why did you decide to start Free Speech for People, especially when you had already founded the National Voting Rights Institute?
Right. Well, I started Free Speech for People with another attorney, Jeff Clements, in 2010 on the day of the Citizens United ruling. By the time I had started that, the National Voting Rights Institute, which I had founded in 1994, had merged in 2007 with an organization called Demos, based out of New York, which is a progressive think tank that works a lot on democracy issues. So I was no longer working at the National Voting Rights Institute. It had already merged with Demos. And this new organization, they said, was spurred by what the Supreme Court did in Citizens United by going over the cliff, declaring that corporations are people with political speech rights. We have since expanded our work to address threats to voting rights and threats to our democracy coming out of a corrupt White House, but we remain dedicated as well to challenging big money in politics.
Give your definition of free speech as laid out in the First Amendment.
Well, free speech is certainly a guarantee that all of us have the right to have our voices heard without any restriction from the federal government, so long as we're not inciting violence, inciting an insurrection, we have that right. But it is also true that we have the right not to have our voices drowned out in the political process. So the free speech right does not extend to the ability to drown out other people's voices. The Supreme Court actually said that in 1949 in a case known as Kovacs v. Cooper. So the First Amendment guarantees free speech for all, but with the understanding that there are limitations with respect to creating danger in our society, inciting violence, and in our view, with respect to ensuring that every voice can be heard in the political process and not be drowned out by big money interests.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important, to remind folks that, well, from my perspective, that free speech means that you can say what you want to say, but I can respond in kind.
Correct.
And you can't censor me because my response may not jive with yours. I think that's a big misunderstanding that's going on now.
Yes.
In the political dialogue. So you kind of alluded to your motivation for starting this organization based off Citizens United. How much damage do you think it has done, and can that damage be repaired?
I think it's done enormous damage to invite corporations now to come in with their general treasury funds and swamp our elections. I do think the damage can be repaired through a constitutional amendment ultimately. That is what's necessary. But short of the amendment, we can do other things to chip away at the ruling and allow for other voices to be heard that don't have the resources of multinational corporations. First, multinational corporations, by and large, have foreign investors, and those foreign investors are now able to subvert existing federal law that bars foreign nationals from spending money directly or indirectly in our elections, and they're able to do that through the corporate form. So we have been advancing legislation all across the country and in Congress that would ban multinational corporate spending in our elections based on their level of foreign investment, effectively saying that foreign influence corporate spending is no longer allowed. That was a loophole created by Citizens United, and we believe it can be closed with this legislation. It's already become the law in cities like Seattle, San Jose, and Portland, Maine, and it's advancing in a number of state legislatures. Another thing we can do is to deal with the problem of super PACs. Now, people think super PACs came directly out of Citizens United, but actually they came out of a D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling known as Speech Now v. FEC 2 months after Citizens United. And there we see 15 years of history of how unlimited donations to independent expenditure committees, super PACs, have effectively created more corruption, more appearance of corruption in our political process. So there's a whole campaign now to abolish super PACs. We're part of that campaign. Professor Larry Lessig at Harvard Law School is helping to lead it as well through his group Equal Citizens. And there's a case pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit coming out of the state of Maine, which passed a law banning super PACs in their elections. And that case could very well be a case that ultimately gets us to the place of reversing the prior ruling from the D.C. Circuit that's created super PACs and allows us to abolish them nationwide.
Yeah. Why is it important to expand the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the modern day has 9 justices, but there's nothing in the Constitution that requires that number stay the same, and in fact, it used to have less. So we have advocated for that, but we also advocate for term limits for justices. We believe it's necessary to have a term limit that is meaningful and allows for other justices to be appointed. And this has been legislation pending in the Congress that we fully endorse.
Yeah. So one of the arguments that I agree with in expanding the court is that traditionally when the court has been expanded, it's to make sure that it matches the federal judicial districts throughout the country. The Court of Appeals.
Yes, exactly.
And so if there's 11 Court of Appeals, then there should be 11 justices and one justice should be assigned to each court. If it's 13, then it should be 13 justices. That's the way I look at it, because you've got right now 9 and you've got at least 2 justices that have multiple districts they're responsible for.
Yeah.
So, it makes sense to me, but the politics the politics in general have dictators like, if the Democrats want it, then the Republicans are against it. If the Republicans want it, the Democrats are against it. And somehow, some way I think that should be legislation, that each justice should be responsible for a Court of Appeals. Therefore, it would automatically make sure that the court has to expand.
That is definitely the argument for it, and that is what has been presented in the Judiciary Act that has been introduced in Congress. I think it's critical, though, to note that right now we're dealing with an existential crisis for our democracy, and that's because of somebody in the Oval Office who wants to be a dictator. And that person, in our view, should not have the ability to expand the Supreme Court. In fact, that person needs to be impeached and removed from public office. We've launched an entire campaign around this, impeachtrumpagain.org. More than 1 million people all across the country have signed on demanding impeachment proceedings against this flawless president, Donald Trump. And we have documented in detail 25 distinct grounds for his impeachment and removal. So before we get to a broader solution of expanding the court, we need to deal with this existential crisis here and now. This president is engaged in multiple abuses of power. We have cited them on our site. I'll just give a few examples. Committing treason by levying war against the United States, individual states, and their people, sending the military into our nation's cities to try to squash dissent, in disappearing people from our streets, sending them to foreign torture prisons, removing U.S. residents, detaining, arresting, and removing them without due process of law, attacking the United States Congress by freezing trillions of dollars of public funds that have been duly appropriated by the U.S. Congress, attacking the judiciary, refusing to follow court orders, federal court orders from all across the country, usurping judicial authority. The list goes on with respect to the lawlessness coming out of this White House. And that existential crisis needs to be confronted here and now.
So this wasn't a planned question, but since you brought that up, have you had any response from members of Congress to those grounds for impeachment? And if so, why hasn't there any? Well, I know why it hasn't happened now, but is there a plan based on the conversations that you've had?
Yeah, there absolutely is a plan, and our plan is to keep building this case because we know it will only grow as it does on a daily basis with these multiple abuses of power. The answer to your question is yes. We've been in contact with many members of Congress, one of whom, Congressman Al Green of Houston, Texas, has championed this in the United States Congress. We helped him draft articles of impeachment that he introduced in June of this year in the U.S. Congress that dealt with the illegal and unlawful bombing of Iran without any authorization under the War Powers Clause. So that particular article of impeachment was voted on by the House, full House, because he forced a floor vote. Any member of Congress, regardless of whether they're on the Judiciary Committee, can invoke what is known as House Rule 9 for a privilege resolution, and this is considered to be a privilege resolution, any matter on impeachment. So he forced that vote. 78 of his colleagues voted with him to advance those articles of impeachment. And one additional one, Congressman Andre Carson, Indiana, joined the very next day. So we're up to 80 members of Congress now who support impeachment proceedings against this president. That is quadruple the number that was there before that vote. Only 20 were on record. Now they're 80. And I think the numbers will only continue to grow as this president continues to trample on the Constitution and the rule of law.
Yeah. All right. So why is your organization pushing for constitutional amendments instead of federal legislation to handle some of these issues?
Well, in some of these issues, what's required is to overturn the Supreme Court. So that's why a constitutional amendment is required. In some of them, it's required to amend the Constitution to reverse something that's already in the Constitution. So, for example, the Electoral College, which is an antiquated relic dating back to protecting the slave states, is in the Constitution. We support an amendment to overturn that and abolish the Electoral College and have the president only elected by popular vote. In addition, we do not have a right to vote formally in our U.S. Constitution. We're only one of 11 industrialized democracies in the world that does not have an affirmative, guaranteed right to vote in our Constitution. Newer democracies like South Africa's democracy, they draw up a constitution with help actually from U.S. experts. They put into the Constitution an affirmative right to vote. We don't have that, so that's an amendment that is required. The amendment to overturn Citizens United and Buckley v. Vallejo is needed because federal legislation can't overturn a Supreme Court ruling, like that is interpreting the Constitution. It needs to be done via a constitutional amendment. So these are amendments that we support, as well as others on our site at freespeechforpeople.org. We have a whole section of the site devoted to democracy amendments, and we think they're critical to advancing, our democracy forward and expanding the electorate.
So since you mentioned several of the ones that you're pushing, so the People's Rights Amendment, that's the one that's going to directly impact Citizens United. Is that correct?
It is, but it's also going to directly impact the overall fabricated doctrine of corporate constitutional rights. So the story behind Citizens United is that it was part of a long road of trying to get corporations to have constitutional rights dating back to the early 1970s by then Lewis Powell, before he became a justice on the Supreme Court, writing a memorandum that set out, private memorandum, never supposed to see the light of day, for, the business community, setting out why he thought corporations should be granted these constitutional rights to go against regulations that were enacted during that time that are designed to protect the public interest. And that road that we've been on for decades now of granting corporations this constitutional rights is a dangerous road and one that undermines our democracy and our republic. And so the People's Rights Amendment is designed to overturn that entire fabricated doctrine of corporate constitutional rights. Corporations are not people. They are artificial creatures of the state. They do not have the same abilities like you and I. They don't breathe. They don't bleed. They don't send their children off into war. And they actually have state-based privileges that you and I do not have. Limited liability, perpetual life, the ability to aggregate wealth and distribute wealth. And for those reasons, we must not treat them as people with constitutional rights.
So you're saying Mitt Romney was wrong when he said that?
He was wrong, absolutely.
Okay. Is the right to vote amendment designed to supersede the 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th amendments?
No, not at all. But I appreciate you asking that question. Those amendments guarantee the right to vote in the effort to stop discrimination for certain groups of voters. What the right to vote amendment would do would extend that to make it an affirmative right to vote. So right now, when we go into court, as we do at Free Speech or People, to challenge voter suppression laws and challenge voter intimidation, we rely on existing amendments like the Equal Protection Clause out of the 14th Amendment, sometimes the 15th Amendment. But we also rely on federal legislation like the Voting Rights Act of 1965. What we don't have as a tool is an affirmative right to vote in our Constitution, and that would strengthen our ability to take on voter suppression and voter intimidation. Justice Scalia famously said in Bush v. Gore, the 2000 ruling that stopped the vote counting in the state of Florida and handed the presidency to George W. Bush, he said in that ruling, there is no individual right to vote for the electors of the United States. And sadly, he was right. There is no individual right to vote for the electors because they're chosen by, the states. The states go ahead. You vote for your presidential choice in the states, and then the states go ahead and assign the electors. But underlying that was the clear challenge to all of us that we need to have an affirmative right to vote. We need to abolish the Electoral College, but we need to have that affirmatively stated into the Constitution that everyone has that right to vote once they become eligible.
Wouldn't passage of the amendment to abolish the Electoral College skew the political process in favor of one political party?
No, I don't think so. What it would do is it would ensure that the process is democratic, small d, that we're ruling the country based on popular vote, not based on this antiquated system that, again, was designed to protect the slave states.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the general argument now. It's like a lot of people feel that the Republicans would never get a president if it was popular vote. I tend to agree with you that it all depends on what time of existence we live in, right?
Right.
30 years ago, well, I'll go back even further. I'll say 60 plus years ago, John F. Kennedy might not have won.
Right.
Based if it was strictly a popular vote, because of the dynamics of that time. And it would have given Nixon more hope. I put it that way. If we didn't have a electoral college, would the nobody is above the law amendment give more clarity than the 14th Amendment concerning insurrections? And how exactly is that a free speech issue?
Yeah, great question. So look, the nobody above the law amendment is designed to deal with another Supreme Court ruling that was issued, Trump v. United States, which was issued last year and which provides presidential immunity for official acts. It was a disaster of a ruling, one of the worst Supreme Court rulings in its history. It now effectively places the President of the United States above the law when it comes to engaging in official acts. It's critical to note that there is further litigation to be had here on what it means to engage in official acts. We argue in letters to state and local prosecutors in various different states, including California, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, that when it comes to some of the president's actions, like extortion of some of the leading law firms in the country, or like kidnappings, that those are not official acts and that he's not immune under Trump v. U.S. But ultimately, we do have to overturn that ruling. And yes, you're correct that it would, effectively deal with what we saw from the insurrection, where he was left without any, criminal liability from that ruling, despite the fact Jack Smith, the special counsel, said he was going to go back to the district court and demonstrate they did not involve official acts. He, of course, had his case dismissed and he resigned before Trump took power. But we have to get back to the point that the rule of law applies to everyone, including the President of the United States, and not allow this exception, this dangerous exception the court drew in Trump v. U.S.
Yeah, John, I agree with what you're saying. The only thing I disagree with is I would think the Dred Scott decision was worse than the presidential immunity from my perspective. Because
I said one of the worst.
Okay,
I would agree.
All right.
I agree with you. Dred Scott was the worst.
Okay,
but this is one of the worst.
Okay,
yeah.
Since you put the qualifier in there, I'll retract my argument.
Yeah.
Have you considered an amendment to change Congress to a parliamentary system?
We have not come out with a position on that, but we're certainly open to exploring that point. I think there's a strong argument that the U.S. Senate, as it is set up today, is not consistent with principles of democracy. It gives people in Wyoming the same number of seats as people in California, despite huge differences in the population of those two states. And yet, in order to confirm judges on the federal courts and the Supreme Court, each of those senators has an equal vote. So, we're looking at a situation here where effectively people in Wyoming have a greater say than the people of California, given the basis of their population, with respect to the federal judiciary. And that we think is not right. So I do think that there's reasons to explore that question further. We have not formally taken a position, however.
Yeah, because they patterned it sort of off the House of Commons, House of Lords in England. And, where the House of Lords, is set aside. And on the nomination stuff, yeah, I know the argument about Wyoming being equal, but in a situation where you're actually talking about nominations, that might be okay that Rhode Island or Wyoming would have the same impact as Texas and California. But when it comes to, legislation as far as like taxation and all that stuff, I can see that's why the initial concept was that the ideas for taxes would come from the people's house.
Yes.
And that the generation or the monitoring of the revenue and paying of the debt would fall under the Senate's purview.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, I understand all that. But I entertain that the parliamentary, because usually that comes out of the House of Representatives, and then whoever has the majority would then pick their leader to be the president, as opposed to, and then have a different standard to elect who the speaker would be to preside over the House. But I mean, it's, and I'm not trying to have a debate with you about it here, but I wanted the listeners to hear that people have thought about it. And there are discussions about it. A lot of us that are political junkies used to stay up late to watch the House of Commons on C-SPAN and be entertained by the way that they would handle stuff. And, since we're having discussions about the Electoral College and how we choose a president and stuff, I mean, that needs to be on the table, I think. But
I agree, Eric. And, look, I think other reforms need to be on the table too. For example, proportional representation. We have a system right now where we draw these districts. We have gerrymandering happening. Obviously, there are fights around this even before the Supreme Court today coming out of Louisiana. But, there's a whole other system that could be in place here. And the state of California may face a ballot measure in the not too distant future in 2028 or 2030, led by a number of organizations. We've signed on to endorse this effort, which would set up proportional representation for their state legislature. And that kind of system, you invite more parties to the table, more political parties emerge, because then they're given a guarantee. If they get 10%, 20% of the vote, they get a certain number of seats in that legislature. And I think you'd have more voices, and you'd actually probably have more participation, because more people would come out when they see more opportunities and choices on the ballot than the two-party system we have today.
Yeah, and I think that's the other argument about the parliamentary system, because I remember when South Africa first started having parliamentary elections under the new regime, I guess, for lack of a better term, they had like 20 political parties that ran.
Yeah.
And I think at least 8 of them got seats in parliament. So, a lot of people do not like the binary system that we have.
Yeah.
And given more choices, people might be more engaged to participate, because that's the ultimate goal, is to get more people to participate.
I agree.
Well, John Bonifaz, I see that we could have conversations for a long, long time. And we probably would have a set date for us to sit and have coffee and tea and talk about all the things that's going on. But I'm limited in time for this thing. But if people want to continue to engage with you and the organization and all that stuff, how can people do that?
Absolutely. They can go to our website, freespeechforpeople.org, sign up to get updates. We have a number of take action items on the site, but also we email our list about various activities we're engaged in And we welcome people joining us. And of course, we welcome people joining us at impeachTrumpAgain.org, where people can sign our petition and have their voice heard on that critical question today.
Yeah. And I'm glad you put that other website out there again so people can jot that down. John, it's been fun, man. I kind of, picked up on your trail a little bit and LinkedIn and saw what you were doing. I was like, oh yeah, I got it. Even if he doesn't want to be on the podcast, I just want to talk to him because he sounds like my kind of guy. Because I like people that have ideas. I think the only way that we can progress as a nation is that we have positive, constructive ideas to make it better. We've managed to be here for about 249 years. So I think if we want to get to the next 250, get to our 500th birthday, we've got to have people like you pushing the envelope and continue to have us think about how we can be better. So I thank you for your work, and I thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Erik. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Leopold, Veronica Cardenas, and John Bonifaz for coming on the program and doing their best to open our minds, right? You know, a lot of those names, if any of those names are, may not be household names to you, but they caught my attention. And these are people who are doing the work, and some have been doing it for a long, long time. Les has been out there since 1975, trying to advocate the value of unions and the strength of labor to benefit the economy. The basic premise, if you treat workers right, if you respect their rights, then the economy will be right. You know what I'm saying? And just get us off of this greed track, which is hard to do because we're human beings. But in order for the country to continue to thrive and thrive even more, in the biblical sense, to live more abundantly, then we got to get off this greed track. And Les has been out there doing the work to make that happen. And, and then we got Veronica Cardenas, who is really one of those people that, is utilizing the experience that she's had, personal and professional, to fight for the dignity of human beings. And she's doing it through immigration law. And I think that's very, very important that she wants to get our minds fixed on the fact that we're dealing with people. Because a lot of times when we get into politics and we start dealing with issues, we get caught up in the language and the fights and all that stuff. And we forget that any piece of legislation, any law that is passed impacts people. And a lot of times it's a life or death situation. And, a lot of the elected officials lose sight of that. And having been an elected official, I know what the trap looks like, right? And so we just have to stay grounded. And Veronica is one of those people that is doing her part to make sure that on this particular issue on immigration, that we stay grounded and be reminded that we're dealing with people. Her organization, Humanigration, is a valuable tool for her contemporaries to get them in the mindset too and not get caught in the trap that elected officials do. And just remember that person coming before you as a potential client is a human being. It's not just another case, right? And then John Bonifaz for his energy and his intellect and his creativity, right? And dealing with issues that will help get us to be a more perfect union, right? To try to eliminate the growing engine that I call the political industrial complex, right? As far as the money goes in campaigns, and try to get that back down to a reasonable level. You know, rich people are always going to have influence and sway because they have money, but it shouldn't be as corrupt as it is now, right? And, and just talking about exploring different ways of how we can govern, how we can get more people engaged, how it can be more representative, right? I'm all down with that. And I appreciate John for being part of the collective that wants to put ideas to paper and push them so that we can be a more perfect union. All right. So, I guess, guys, we've got to continue to try and be patient, but persistent at the same time, right? So we need to be persistent about our concerns and our protestations toward this government and the way that they are making a complete shit show of it, right? It's become apparent that the only value that corporate or mainstream media, however you want to label it, is to get us the information. And, and we hope that the information is accurate, right? When they offer it. But we got to realize that we've got to gather the information and then we've got to act upon it. And I know that the bare minimum is to go vote for change, but we really need to show that we are engaged in this process a little bit more. Again, I don't want you to be political junkies like me, but we got to raise our level up a little bit. We got to raise our intensity a little bit, because the current administration is banking on the fact that they're going to inundate you with so much BS that you will just say, screw it, and not care. That's what they want to do. They want to keep constantly throwing out confusion and chaos so that you would be disengaged. And the reality is that now more than ever, you need to be more focused. You need to really, really pay attention, because they're coming for all of us. All of us that's not in that little bubble that they have, they're coming for all of us. And it may hit you immediately. It may hit you a few months down the road. It may even hit you a couple of years down the road. But it's going to hit you, because their intent is total control, total domination, complete power. That's all they care about. And they want to be entertaining in the process, because that's all the president really knows how to do. You would think that having been in the position before, that we would probably be more sensitive to the fact of the power that he can wield. But it looks like it's had the reverse effect, and he's totally corrupted, and he's just going to do what he wants to do. And he's got the people in place to make it so. Not the folks that could kind of like put the guardrails on and just say, no, sir, that's not a good idea. Maybe you shouldn't go down that route. He's got nobody that'll do that. As a matter of fact, he's just allowing these people to just be as destructive and creative and visceral and vocal as they can be. So it's up to us. Those of us that's not in that circle. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Doesn't matter if you're a libertarian or green. Doesn't matter if you're independent or agnostic, right? You need to be engaged, because it's going to impact you. And there are some folks that say, well, we've always been conservative. No, sir. If you understand the history of the United States every state has had a conservative moment and a progressive moment. Now, wherever you are in the current spectrum, that's where you are, but understanding your history that you've been the opposite at some point, right? You know, everybody looks at Montana. Oh, it's just a red state, blah, blah, this and that. Montana was the first state to elect a woman to Congress. They were the first state to give women the right to vote, right? Or one of them. You know, Kansas, the reason why they were able to defeat legislation that would have made abortion illegal in that state is because it was already in their constitution that abortion was legal, that a woman had a right to choose. It was already in there, right? So they were trying to repeal that right. And the folks said, no, because it's their history. So, you know, when you see a president trying to punish states because he didn't win that state in the election, he didn't get their electoral votes, it's like, so you're disregarding the people that voted for you in that particular state. You're punishing them, right? Because the law of fact impacts everybody, not just particular individuals. And you can't pass laws just to deal with individuals. You can deal with organizations, but you can't deal with individuals, right? So, you know, that's why you can't be vindictive when you're president or whether you're governor or when you're mayor. Can't be vindictive about that. It's like you represent everybody now. The welfare of the entire nation is under your purview, Mr. President. So if you're hell bent on punishing people in California because California didn't vote for you, then you're also punishing the people that are Trump supporters in California, right? You want to cut SNAP benefits, and the poorest states in the nation voted for you. Mississippi comes to mind right away. Poorest state in the nation. And you want to allow the SNAP benefits to end, right? I mean, that's the kind of thinking that we don't need. We need people to understand that all of us are in this thing together. You know, any president that gets 100% of the vote is a president that ran unopposed. And that I don't think has ever happened. So, you know, you've got to represent the people that didn't even vote for you. You've got to care about them. The government has to care about people that didn't vote Republican in this case. If the situation was reversed, which it has been, you got to care about if you're Democrats, you got to care about the Republicans. See, we're all in this thing together. It doesn't matter how frustrating your Thanksgiving dinner arguments will get or, you know, whatever social setting you're in and you have these debates, that's all well and good. And then you go to the voting booth and you make your choice. And now when you get sworn in, you take an oath to protect everybody, to defend the Constitution. That's what you do. You don't take an oath to defend the Constitution and try to destroy it. Don't take an oath to serve the American people and then try to harm them. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just need y'all to be more engaged. I know it's hard. We all got jobs. We all got lives to live. We got issues that we got to deal with. But the reality is a lot of the stuff that's happening in Washington or happening at your respective state capitals is determining about the life that you're trying to live. They're impacting the decisions that you have to make. So you've got to pay attention. And especially to my Black brothers and sisters, I know it's frustrating. I know it's hard to say, well, you know, the system is against, I mean, you know, it's hard to get engaged in a system that you think is against you and was designed to hold you down and all that. But I just need to remind you that the position you're in now, where you are really free to make a choice in every state in the United States, was not the case 60 years ago. It was not the case 100 years ago. Your ability to be apathetic was fought and died for, right? Just like the right to be engaged. So, we have to get focused, like, for example, I think we all should be about reparations. We can disagree on how it's going to be distributed and all that stuff, but I think we should be about reparations. But I think we also need to make sure that we have a country that's going to give us reparations in order to continue to have the discussion. Because if we say, well, let it burn, okay, well, you're going to burn too. You're not going to be spared if the country burns down. If anything, we're going to be impacted first because other folks have resources, primarily money, to stave off the pain for a little while. But if white folks are making $100 and you're making $5, right? Or they're worth $100 and you're worth $5. If the country burns, who's going to fall first? The $5 person or the $100 person, right? What you need to be doing is to try to get us to 25, try to get us to 50, try to get us to 100 and engaging whatever way you can to make sure that we get to that point. Even reparations won't get us there, but it'll get us a lot closer, right? And it's going to take time. That's why it's about persistence and about patience, because you can't fix 400 years of damage in one election. But if you're consistent and persistent and focused and disciplined, that change is going to come. Anytime that you give up, that's a setback. And that's a focus. And I don't care if you're a conservative or a liberal and you're Black. Your overall goal should be the uplift of people, your people, not catering to the other folks' agenda. We have to have an agenda. We have to have a focus. Whatever political ideology you have has to be based on the argument that this is going to uplift Black people. The MAGA agenda, the Project 2025, is not in the benefit of Black people in no chapter whatsoever. None, not one word. I can attest to that. 900 something plus pages. It's not about us. We need to have a Project 2026 and 27 and 28 for us, right? I mean, that's just real talk. And even though we're pushing this agenda for us, the bottom line is, and most people understand, that when we push for stuff, it's beneficial to everybody. History has borne that out. Movements have started because of the movements that we created, right? The strategies that are used were strategies that we invented or we reimagined, right? So keep that in mind as, this episode is about opening your political mind and putting ideas in your head and helping you envision things in a different way. I just need to constantly remind us that our focus should be about our community. And history has borne out that when we look out for our community, we're really looking out for the nation. And a lot of times people have said that Black people have been the conscience of America. And we need to fulfill that obligation. We need to maintain that tradition. And I'm doing my part. There's others that are doing their part, whether it's through podcasts or through public service. But as a collective community, we've got to do that. It's up to us. Nobody's going to come save us. Not even another Black president. Nobody's going to save us but us. And we have to accept that. And we have to get more engaged. All right. That's all I got. supportjamaica.gov.jm. That's supportjamaica.gov.jm if you want to contribute to the rebuild of that island. And Yeah, just stay engaged, y'all. We can do this. We can do this. All right, guys. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.